They said the fire was an accident, but when the walls of the Whispering Pines orphanage collapsed, what they found beneath wasn't ash. It was evidence. Evidence of a hidden war against children no one was ever meant to see. You're about to hear something few men ever do. Something that rewrites everything you were told about morality, medicine, and the institutions meant to protect us. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. This story was buried for 130 years, and it's time it saw the light. Vermont, 1886. A dense fog rolled through the pine-covered hills of Millbrook, wrapping the land in a silence too thick to be natural. The trees whispered things that winter morning, so the locals said. And by nightfall, the orphanage at the edge of the woods was gone, engulfed in flame. 53 children unaccounted for. No survivors, no official answers. But there was one problem. The bodies they found didn't die in the fire. Beneath the scorched floorboards of Whispering Pines lay a basement complex no one had reported. Inside, investigators found rusted surgical restraints bolted to concrete, journals soaked in dried blood, and drawings, by children, of things no child should have seen, let alone understood. These weren't just orphans. They were subjects of an experimental doctrine of control, punishment, and obedience wrapped in the language of Christian charity. And the man behind it? Dr. Ezekiel Harrington, a former Union Army surgeon turned moral reformer. But what Harrington built in Vermont was no orphanage. It was a prototype. You see, the goal was never care. It was compliance. He believed children born from poverty, crime, or disease were defective, and he made it his life's mission to fix them, not with love but with scalpels, isolation, and pain. A closed institution 5 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a single road, and operating for nearly 2 decades without oversight. The documents recovered after the fire weren't meant to survive, but they did. And now, we're going to walk through them together, one page at a time. You'll see the procedures, the techniques, the funding trails, and you'll understand why this wasn't an isolated horror. This was the seed of a network. But be warned, what you're about to hear isn't just dark history, it's living legacy, because what started at Whispering Pines didn't end there, and once you know what they did to those children, you'll never see modern institutions the same again. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the fire, it was the silence, the total deliberate absence of records. Not one adoption form, not one death certificate. For 18 years, the state of Vermont received glowing reports from a facility that buried its failures beneath the floorboards. They told the townspeople that Whispering Pines was a place of healing, that Dr. Harrington, with his polished sermons and military medals, had given his life to rescuing lost children. But what they didn't say was this: none of those children ever came back. You're not supposed to ask questions like this. You're not supposed to look deeper, but you're here now. And if you've made it this far, it means something inside you is ready to wake up. So stay close, stay sharp. The local newspaper archives from Millbrook stopped mentioning the orphanage after 1874, just 3 years after it opened. No mention of progress, no reports of community involvement, no names of children placed with families. Only donations, large, consistent donations from concerned benefactors whose names were scrubbed from the ledgers. Every state inspection was pre-scheduled, every report handwritten by Dr. Harrington himself. And when the Burlington Free Press ran a short obituary for a local farmer's child who died in the winter of 1881, it included a single line: the boy, having been transferred to Whispering Pines for corrective discipline, was never seen again. No follow-up, no outrage, just acceptance. Why? Because by then the town had learned the rules. Keep your head down, don't ask about the orphanage, and never, ever go near it after dark. The truth didn't begin to surface until decades later. In 1972, a team from the Boston Medical Historical Society was cataloging forgotten case studies when they discovered a leather-bound journal wedged behind a filing cabinet in a decommissioned wing. It was labeled simply E.H. Millbrook Unit. What they found inside changed everything. Clinical records of children classified by behavioral defect, diagrams of basement modifications, dosage tables for chemical compounds tested on subjects aged 6 to 12. There were no names, just numbers, and underneath every set of notes the same chilling phrase. The subject demonstrates progress toward moral realignment. No signatures. But the handwriting matched samples from Dr. Ezekiel Harrington's wartime journals. This wasn't therapy, this wasn't reform, this was behavior engineering, and it didn't stop when the building burned, because institutions change names, but the blueprint remains. Are you starting to see it? Then brace yourself. They say the fire was started by lightning, but firefighters reported something else. Multiple ignition points, accelerants and burned locks from the outside. Someone wanted Whispering Pines to burn, but not to escape, to erase. Who were they trying to silence? Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, and say it loud. The silence ends here. The silence ends here. Say it twice. Say it like you're tearing the gag off history's mouth, because what I'm about to show you was never meant to reach the public. The investigation following the fire was over before it began. Officially, it lasted 6 days. Unofficially, it never started. The coroner's report, sealed for 100 years. The surviving architectural plans of the building vanished. The state board responsible for orphanage oversight disbanded the following spring due to reorganization. And yet, one man didn't let it go. Marcus Wheeler, a journalist from the Burlington Free Press, began collecting survivor rumors. He found a retired groundskeeper, Isaac Monroe, living in near isolation in the Adirondacks. The man was 84, dying. And what he said shook Wheeler to his core. He remembered the screams. He remembered hauling barrels labeled biological waste out of the basement every Monday night under Dr. Harrington's orders. He remembered the children who had numbers tattooed inside their lips, so they could be identified even if their faces were damaged beyond recognition. But what terrified him most was what he wasn't allowed to see. There was a locked door in the lowest sublevel. Behind it, Dr. Harrington kept what he called the archive. Monroe was told if he ever touched it, he'd be next. But the doctor had a pattern. Whenever new money came in, shipments followed. Boxes, crates, vials, and letters in German, French, and, once, Russian. This wasn't just a rogue doctor. It was international. And in 1974, when Wheeler finally accessed the last remnants of the orphanage's rubble, he found what no one else had the stomach to dig for. A fireproof vault, blackened but intact, embedded in the foundation. Inside, 11 ledgers, bound in pigskin, each with the insignia E.H. Behavioral Sciences Division. And what they contained was so methodical, so emotionless, that it made the brutality of the experiments feel almost secondary. Because this was never just about children, it was about what society could become, if you learned to shape it from the roots. From the minds too young to resist, from the ones no one would miss, from the orphans. You ready for what's next? You think the story ends with fire? Fire doesn't end stories like this. Fire buries evidence, fire buys time. And, most importantly, fire shifts blame. But ashes don't lie, and what investigators found beneath the ruins of Whispering Pines proved one thing. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a larger system already in motion. We've been trained to see history in isolated events, tragedies, accidents, lone madmen. But that's the illusion. That's how power stays clean. What burned in Vermont in 1886 wasn't an accident. It was a reset. The blueprints found in the vault were not just schematics for the orphanage. They were expansion models, copies, scaled adaptations labeled WP2, WP3, and Harrow's Gate, recommended modifications. Each contained notes about location suitability, water access, population density, and, chillingly, regional child surplus. Child surplus. This wasn't a refuge. It was an extraction model, a system for harvesting behavior, breaking resistance, and installing obedience into the most vulnerable layer of society. One of the ledgers detailed a planned facility in Pennsylvania with partnerships to 2 local churches and a shipping warehouse. Another was marked for construction in Indiana on land donated by a prominent railroad executive. These weren't whispers, they were plans, fully funded, fully documented, all dated before the fire. And here's the part no one wants to hear, the part that makes most men flinch. The fire was lit from within. An accelerant was poured through the basement grates. All staff had been dismissed early. The children were locked in. The outer doors were chained shut, not from inside but by external clamps drilled into the frame. This was not an escape. It was a purge of evidence, a purge of witnesses, a purge of the flawed batch, the test subjects whose responses had deviated from projected outcomes, as one internal memo said. Do you understand? They burned their own project. Not to stop it but to improve it, to cleanse the record. And from those ashes, a cleaner, quieter version was born. New facilities, new methods, same ideology. And Dr. Harrington disappeared. No death record, no grave, no confirmed sighting after the fire, but financial records show payments made in his name as late as 1893 to a clinic in Basel, Switzerland. Where did he go? What did he continue? And who picked up where he left off? You're about to find out. It was never just about obedience. It was about redesign, about cracking the code of a child's mind before society had shaped it, before memory formed identity, before language built resistance. Dr. Harrington called it preconceptual molding. The ledgers simply called it Phase 1. And the orphans of Whispering Pines? They were never seen as children. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. And if you've ever had a memory that felt too sharp, too early, too wrong, say it now. Because something was planted. We now know that Harrington's project was funded not just by state donations, but by silent foreign investors, gold-marked bills, bank drafts originating from institutions in Strasbourg, Warsaw, and, most damning, a research consortium based in London under the name the Orpheus Trust. Officially, it was a philanthropic group for juvenile behavioral reform. Unofficially, it was a psychological weapons program. The Orpheus Trust had one goal: to develop methods for reshaping personality structures using fear, repetition, and isolation. Their logic was simple. Why treat trauma when you can harness it? Their files mention a technique piloted at Whispering Pines known as silence therapy. Children under 5 were kept in absolute silence for 72 hours, no speaking, no sound, no light. Infractions were punished with sudden, blinding exposure to music, screams, or flashing lights, followed by another silent cycle. They weren't testing discipline, they were mapping the thresholds of the human soul. But the most chilling discovery came not from the vault, but from a photograph. Wheeler found it misfiled in the town archives. A class photo, dated just weeks before the fire. 24 children, pale and stiff, standing in rows. But someone had scribbled numbers onto their foreheads in ink, and in the margins, in faded cursive, subjects 4 through 27, control group B, response level insufficient. But that's not the worst part. There's a girl in the back row, face blurred, head slightly turned, and on the back of the photo a single word scratched in: survived. No name, no record, no follow-up, just one survivor. And if she lived, where did she go? Who protected her? Who silenced her? And what did she remember? Because if even one child slipped the system, then the story didn't end in fire. It continued in silence, in shadows, and in the next section, we trace the girl who vanished. She was never meant to live. Survivors weren't part of the design. She was the flaw in the formula, the ghost in their machine, and yet somehow she slipped past the flames, past the smoke, past the cold calculations of men who believed they'd erased everything. Her name was never recorded, but the town called her the Ash Girl, because she walked out of those woods covered in soot, barefoot, silent, and smiling. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because this isn't just about Vermont anymore. This is about the places they went next, and the girl who remembered. The official record claims all 27 children perished in the Whispering Pines fire, but that's a lie, a coordinated lie. Testimonies from two local boys, both aged 12 at the time, swore they saw a figure crawl through a drainage pipe hours before the fire reached its peak. Small, limping, carrying something that glowed faintly red. That something was later found in the town cemetery, buried shallow beneath the soil of an unmarked grave. But it was a journal. Leather-bound, burned along the edges, but the center was intact, pages filled with childlike scrawl, mismatched letters, broken sentences and drawings, dozens of drawings, and every page had the same symbol, an open eye with thorns for lashes. The Ash Girl had drawn the experiments, the isolation rooms, the cold meals, the white-masked men, the underground stairs that led nowhere. But one page was different. It showed 3 adult figures, each with dark circular faces and mouths sewn shut. Behind them stood something enormous, towering, faceless, arms outstretched across the page. At the bottom, just 4 words: "They listen through us." The local sheriff took possession of the journal, and then he vanished. No resignation, no transfer. His cabin was found empty weeks later, fireplace still warm, horses unfed, and his badge, left perfectly centered on the table next to the journal, which was now blank. Every page, blank, except for one line written in fresh ink at the bottom of the last page: "She's still remembering." That's what they feared, not exposure, not lawsuits, memory, because a child who remembers can speak, a child who speaks can testify, and a child who testifies can bring it all down. But they didn't just erase her, they used her. They didn't want to destroy her, they wanted to replicate her, because in her survival, in that crack in the system, they found something far more valuable than obedience: adaptation, resilience under engineered suffering. The Ash Girl didn't escape the experiment. She became its blueprint, the mold for something worse, something designed to endure. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what happened next didn't just stay in Vermont. It moved, it spread, and it evolved. A year after the fire in 1887, a private estate in Connecticut, Whitley converted into the Camberwell School for Displaced Girls. No public record of ownership, no charter. But it bore a familiar insignia, an open eye, hidden in the design of its iron gate. Guess who the first student was? A girl with no surname, no next of kin, no birth certificate. The intake form simply read, Subject 1, Reintroduction, Phase 2. They didn't just hide her, they reintroduced her into another facility, under another name. But this time she wasn't the subject, she was the carrier. Reports from a whistleblower groundskeeper, whose letter survived only because he sent it anonymously to a parish in New York, detailed strange occurrences. Girls mimicking one another's movements without speaking, drawing symbols they were never taught, waking in the night, murmuring in unison. And the Ash Girl. She spoke only once. He said she approached the chapel one evening, placed her hand on the altar and whispered, "The fire didn't take us, it freed us. We're remembering now." That same week, 4 staff members resigned, 2 were institutionalized, and yet the school remained open, operating under 5 different names between 1887 and 1903. Each time it was shut down, it reopened within the year. Different building, same patterns, same incidents, same symbols, and in every instance, one child always remained between closures: a quiet girl, mid-teens, average height, mismatched eyes. Some say she never aged, others say she changed faces. But every file used the same term in the margins: resonant subject. That's what she became. Not a child, not a victim, a frequency, one that carried the trauma forward, passed it, encoded it, weaponized it in others. She wasn't just remembering anymore, she was awakening others. The Ash Girl wasn't hidden, she was broadcast, whispered into the minds of others like a parasite carried through memory itself. The Orpheus Trust didn't bury her, they planted her, and then they waited for her to bloom in other children, quietly, systematically, nationwide. She became theirs. The infection. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, Because if your childhood school had strange closures, unexplained drills, or rumors of the quiet girl, you may have already seen her effects. Between 1904 and 1912, a new educational initiative swept through the Northeast, the Independent Enrichment Consortium, offering free educational programming and experimental sensory curriculum to rural schools. It was funded, on paper, by anonymous philanthropists interested in child psychology. But internal documents leaked decades later showed a different signature. Every grant was signed OT, Initiative 7. OT, the Orpheus Trust. The curriculum was odd. Silent reading of books with no titles, lessons on subconscious hygiene, teachers instructed to wear tinted glasses to reduce reflective exposure. And then came the drawings. Hundreds of children, across dozens of schools, began sketching the same thing. An eye with thorned lashes. They called it the window seed. Psychiatrists brought in to evaluate the children called it patterned shared delusion. But they couldn't explain how students from different towns, who'd never met, described the same dreams. They all saw a girl in a soot-stained dress, humming a song no one could place. They all heard her whisper in the walls. It didn't start with us. And then the behavioral shifts began. Some children stopped speaking altogether. Others began to mimic the voice patterns and movements of their peers with unsettling precision. When interviewed, a handful of children used a phrase that shook the investigators. "We're helping her remember." Not themselves, her. They weren't being haunted. They were being reprogrammed. By 1913, the Enrichment Consortium dissolved overnight. Funding vanished, staff resigned, buildings sold for pennies. And yet, the effect has remained. Those children, now adults, would go on to report lifelong psychological disturbances, nightmares, phobias, sudden compulsions to write in languages they'd never learned. And among them, scattered in psychiatric hospitals and quiet, forgotten towns, were whispers of the same girl, still 15, still barefoot, still smiling. She never left them. Because the Orpheus Trust had succeeded, she was no longer just a subject, she was now a signal. It started with a hum, barely audible, like a lullaby pulled from the bottom of a well. The reel, marked only Camden, Session 4, was found in a locked drawer at the National Phonographic Archives in 1976. But the voice on it belonged to a girl who should have been dead nearly a century earlier, not silenced, just waiting for someone to press play. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. Because what you're about to hear was never meant to survive, and once it's heard, it doesn't forget you either. The recording, dated October 1922, was made at Camden Sanitarium in New Jersey. The patient, female, 15, name unknown, admitted under false credentials after collapsing in a church during service. Witnesses claim she convulsed violently when the choir began singing, "Nearer, my God, to Thee." The doctor's notes mention something more chilling. She awoke mid-seizure and whispered, "Not nearer, never nearer. She's already inside." She was immediately transferred to Camden and placed in isolation. What follows is the only known surviving audio interaction. At first it's just room tone, then a breath, then a humming noise. Steady, low-pitched, mechanical, but layered with human vocal tone. It grows louder. At the 3-minute mark, she speaks. "This place smells like the pine roots." She remembers. She never forgets. And when you close your eyes, she'll move your hands for you. Then, a scream. Not from her. From the doctor. In the background, the physician begins shouting incoherently. He repeats the same word 19 times. "Window, window, window." The recording ends abruptly. He was found the next morning, blind, with both eyes bloodshot and wide open, staring at the corner of the padded cell. He'd scratched the Orpheus eye into the wall with his own fingernail. The girl? Vanished. No records of release, no death certificate, no transfer. Just disappeared. But in the months following, 3 more recordings surfaced. All anonymous, all mailed to different regional mental hospitals. each one bearing a wax seal in the shape of a pine cone, the Orpheus Trust's original insignia. Each recording contained the same hum. Each one drove at least one listener to madness. And from 1923 to 1931, a string of 17 identical suicides occurred among psychiatrists in 4 states, each found with blood under their fingernails and sketches of windows carved into their desks. But there was one common thread in every case. They all had access to the girl's voice. He was found in a cave 30 miles from his own home, surrounded by crude charcoal drawings, all of the same girl. But in each one, she was missing her mouth, the only surviving person to hear her voice twice. Didn't speak a word for the next 14 years. Dr. Elijah Varnum, Harvard-trained neuropsychologist and forensic consultant to the U.S. Army, was the man they sent when things didn't make sense. But after Camden, after the tapes, he didn't make sense anymore. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because Varnum's confession, hidden for decades by military archives, is about to be heard for the first time. And once you hear what she told him, the way you remember things may never feel safe again. The year was 1924. Varnum was summoned privately to review what officials called a viral auditory hallucination, a soft hum that spread across several VA hospitals in the Northeast. Nurses heard it in vents, janitors in pembed, drain pipes, patients in their teeth. At one site in Rhode Island, all 6 long-term psychiatric patients attempted suicide the same night, without ever speaking to one another. Each left a drawing, each one a faceless girl standing at a window pointing out. Varnum was brought in to decode the pattern. What he discovered wasn't auditory. In his private notes, locked away under military seal until 1979, he writes, "The humming isn't sound. It's memory, not theirs, hers. It's a signal, like a broadcast, and it's not reaching their ears. It's burrowing deeper, into the folds, into the cracks where trauma hides. It's using the past like a doorway." He conducted a single session with one of the few conscious patients, a former Navy radio man named Cole, who described the sound as someone else remembering through me. He said he dreamed of a burning building, girls inside, their mouths sewn shut, but one girl walking out unharmed. Varnum asked him to describe her. He didn't speak, he just drew. The same girl, same mismatched eyes, same cold window stare. But the most disturbing note in Varnum's journal wasn't about Cole. It was about himself. "I woke this morning in my own bed, hands black with soot, my own mouth sewn shut, in the dream, but the pain in my lips felt real, and under my fingernails, pine needles." He resigned that day. 2 weeks later, he disappeared, found a year later in a cave, alive but wordless, surrounded by drawings. But here's where it gets darker. After 14 years of silence, in 1939, he spoke one sentence to a nurse, only once. "She doesn't need your ears, she needs your grief. That's how she gets in." The file was sealed under Project Solace. Top clearance, eyes only. Misfiled for decades until a Cold War archivist flagged it for destruction in 1972, but before it burned, he read one phrase he would never forget. "Do not record her voice. It cannot be contained in tape." The black folder was stamped with a code that hadn't been used since 1944, OPWPH 13. Whispering Pines Harbinger. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because the US government once tried to bottle the voice of a girl no one believed existed, and what they unleashed broke more than just minds. The Whispering Pines phenomenon was reclassified after 1939, no longer considered paranormal. It was labeled anomalous psychological influence of unknown origin, a term designed to attract the military's top interest and deepest secrecy. Buried within the black folder was a set of experiments conducted in New Hampshire, far from Vermont, at a repurposed Civil War prison. Codename, Threnody Station. The goal, replicate the signal, induce the dream. Soldiers were dosed with isolated frequencies taken from a wax cylinder recording found at the Orphanage ruins. A cylinder so degraded that only fragments remained. But the sound didn't matter, because according to Dr. Varnum's hidden addendum, it wasn't sound at all. She travels through grief, not wires, through memory, not microphones. When you record her, she enters the listener. And the cylinder, it's not audio, it's a key. Threnody Station ran 17 trials. The first 12 were audio only. Unsuccessful. The 13th trial, conducted during a thunderstorm with subjects in sensory deprivation tanks, yielded something far more disturbing: shared hallucinations. 5 soldiers in 5 separate tanks all described seeing a girl with 2 different colored eyes. All described her saying the same thing. "You left us there, you burned the place." But we never left. Their blood work after the session showed a complete suppression of cortisol, the body's stress hormone. Instead, all 5 produced elevated levels of oxytocin, the bonding chemical, as if they had forged an emotional connection with a voice. 2 of the men deserted within 48 hours. They were found walking barefoot in the woods, carving names into tree trunks, namps, as not on any orphanage record, but confirmed by town death certificates from 1886. The remaining 3 men, one, shot himself in front of the mirror, saying, "She sees through reflections." Another attempted to remove his ears. The last one vanished, and yet, Threnody Station was never shut down. In fact, in 1945 it was absorbed into the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, under a black project titled Echo Garden. The original premise of Project Echo Garden was simple: weaponize grief. But the outcome was a nightmare no agency could contain. They tried to grow a garden in the human mind and ended up unleashing something that had been buried, not planted. It began with harvested memory artifacts, collected from trauma sites across the Northeast. Items that held pain, as one agent wrote in his classified field report. Dolls, hair combs, burnt hymnals from orphanage ruins, including whispering pines. Each object was tagged with a number, but one item had no tag, no origin: a child's drawing, done in soot on the back of a government report from 1886. A girl standing in front of a burning building, with her mouth covered in red ink. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. Because the closer we get to Echo Garden, the more we realize this was never just about the past. It was about what follows us. The agents weren't priests, they weren't scientists, they were handlers. Echo Garden didn't test ideas, it tested thresholds. How long can a subject listen before they change? How many voices can they carry before one becomes permanent? They didn't use tapes. Not anymore. By 1951, they had developed a resonant encoding matrix, a room-sized machine that could project emotional frequencies into a test subject's mind. Not words, not images, feelings. And those feelings weren't synthetic, they were extracted. The machine was fed trauma profiles taken from orphans at Whispering Pines, not data, experiences, crystallized in a psychic medium formed from me, mercury and bone ash. The documents call it sentient residue. What we pulled from those ashes wasn't memory, it was intention. The test subjects began describing dreams of pine trees bleeding from the bark, of doors in their childhood homes that didn't used to be there, of girls sitting at the foot of their beds, whispering secrets in their mothers' voices. They weren't hallucinating, because one subject, a Korean war vet named Victor Lang, had never been to Vermont, never heard of Whispering Pines, never even believed in the paranormal, and yet during his 29th session, he produced a sketch in crayon of the exact floor plan of the orphanage's west wing, the wing that burned, the wing no photos survived. Lang began sleep-speaking in the voices of multiple girls. He spoke in unison, multiple pitch layers, all of them crying the same phrase: "You tried to bury us in the forest, but the roots grew mouths." And that's when the project was quietly renamed again, from Echo Garden to Oculus 9, because someone realized the voices weren't random echoes of the past. They were watching, they were studying, they were waiting. July 4th, 1952, the 4th of July. But inside Oculus 9 there were no fireworks, just static. The intercoms began transmitting laughter, children's laughter, on every floor, but there were no children in the facility. Not anymore. That day is now known in classified memos as the Soundfall event. For exactly 44 minutes, all recorded communication, phones, radios, even Morse code, became corrupted by a pattern of overlapping girls' voices chanting the same sequence backwards and forwards. She remembers, she remembers, she remembers. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what happened next was erased from textbooks, redacted from the Pentagon logs, and buried under 27 layers of false flag operations. The first whistleblower was Dr. Elliot Marrow, a clinical psychologist who had worked under Project Oculus for 9 months. He began leaving handwritten notes inside Bibles at local chapels across Vermont, phrases like, "not ghosts, not demons, orphans with a pulse outside time," and "they fed her ash and mercury, and she answered back." Marrow's final note was never published, but recovered fragments show he believed the entity, what the agency now called the Root Girl, had never died in the 1886 fire. She had multiplied. According to Marrow, every session involving the resonance chamber created new manifestations. Not projections, not copies. Offspring. Emotional extensions of a central mind trying to rebuild itself through human memory. She's not haunting the past. She's nesting in the living. By then, agents across multiple states reported strange mirror anomalies. One handler went blind in a single eye after reporting a girl watching him from inside his own reflection. Mirrors were removed from the facility. All reflective surfaces were banned, including water. That same month, Dr. Marrow vanished. No trace. But his personal tape recorder was found hidden behind a false panel in the men's washroom at Oculus 9. The final 3 minutes of the tape remain classified, but the declassified portion is chilling enough. Marrow sobbing, "I told them we were building a corridor into the past. I didn't know we were laying eggs." Then a pause, breathing. Then a second voice, not Marrow's, a girl's voice, calm, whispering, "Don't look behind you. That's where I keep the copies." From that day, the agency began systematically deleting all mentions of Whispering Pines Orphanage from public record. Blueprints vanished, newspaper archives altered, even obituaries were rewritten. Because if the public ever learned what the agency knew, that the 1886 fire wasn't an accident, the truth would spread, like a root system. In the next section we explore the Mirror Protocol, the terrifying experiments conducted in total darkness to test whether the Root Girl could enter through the mind's own reflections. And what happened when one subject tried to shatter her. She only appeared when they were alone, and never in full light. Always in the flicker, in candle stutter, in power outages, in the soft hum of CRT monitors just before they failed. The Mirror Protocol began in September of 1952 under a newly formed subdivision of Oculus 9 called Division Echo. Their sole mission: to determine whether visual perception alone could act as a gateway vector for the Root Girl's manifestations. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what you're about to hear was once considered psychological warfare against American citizens, tested behind closed doors, and buried beneath a federal hydroelectric dam. Phase 1 was simple: 10 volunteers, all military, each placed in isolated dark rooms with a single mirror facing them. No light source was provided except for a timed flash every 7 minutes. They were told to observe their own reflection for as long as they could bear. No communication, no stimulation, just their own face again and again in flickering intervals. By day 2, 60% of subjects began reporting mirrored inconsistencies, reflections that blinked out of sync, expressions that did not match their own, subtle gestures mimicking them, but delayed. By day 4, one subject clawed out both eyes using fragments of his own dog tags. His final journal entry simply read, "She's in the in-between, the flash lets her move." They thought it was hallucination. But then came the film. A hidden camera had been placed behind the two-way mirror in room 7. During the 2:07 a.m. flash cycle, the subject in the chair did not move, but his reflection smiled, independently, a wide, unnatural grin, eyelids peeled upward. The subject himself remained catatonic. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed the reflector. Ed girl's silhouette behind his shoulder, impossibly close, her features flickering in and out of focus, long hair, pale skin, eyes completely black. They shut the experiment down immediately, but the symptoms didn't stop. Subjects reported hearing their own voices whispering to them, in rooms they'd never entered. Several developed reflection phobia, unable to approach mirrors or polished surfaces. One subject insisted that his reflection was no longer his. The final subject, known only as Patient Delta 3, vanished entirely. Security footage shows him entering the room. No footage shows him leaving. His mirror, found shattered, and in the corner of the room, drawn in dried blood. I let her through. She's brighter than the flash now. From that moment, Division Echo halted all mirror-based testing. But it was too late, because reflections are not just optical, they're neurological, and the Root Girl had found something far more useful than mirrors. She had found memory. She doesn't live in the past, she feeds on it. Every time you remember her, she remembers you back, sharper, closer, hungrier. The recall trials began as grief therapy. At least, that's how they justified it to the public. In reality, it was a covert psychological experiment under Project Narrowgate, an initiative aiming to tap into post-mortem memory resonance. Their theory, that traumatic loss could reopen neurological pathways connecting to locked memory states, moments so powerful they bent reality inward like a black hole. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what you'll hear next involves grieving mothers, dead children, and a government so obsessed with forbidden knowledge, they didn't care what they woke up. In 1954, 17 mothers who had lost children under violent and ambiguous circumstances were invited to Whispering Pines under the pretense of pioneering grief therapy. But the truth was far darker. Each woman was placed in a reconstructed child's room, identical to the one their lost child once slept in. Same bed, same wallpaper, same worn toys. And on the nightstand, a single photo of the child. Only it wasn't a photo. It was a fabricated image created from composite sketches, not matching the real child exactly, but slightly off. The eyes wider, the expression distant. A subtle distortion meant to confuse memory recall. At first, nothing happened. The women wept, whispered prayers, held the toys like relics from a vanished world. Then, one by one, they started speaking to the photo. Not about the child, to it. One mother, Agnes Bellman, was found cradling the pillow, whispering, "I remember you now, but it's not your name anymore, is it?" Another, Judith Marrow, screamed so violently when a nurse turned off the night lamp that they had to sedate her, her last audible sentence. "She's in his voice now. It's not mine when I speak." But the real horror began when the mothers started sharing memories they had never lived. Memories of rooms they never entered. Other children they'd never birthed. They recalled games played in the Whispering Pines basement, games the staff swore had never existed. A secret recording from Patient 009, played during a sleep cycle, caught her humming a lullaby that matched an unreleased audio file discovered years earlier during the Orphanage's 1891 shutdown. There was no physical connection between the subjects, but there was a mnemonic infection, a psychic bleed-through that passed memory like a contagion, and behind every recall, one figure always returned, a girl with a high, quivering laugh, shadow white eyes, and a voice that whispered, "It's time again." The experiment was abandoned. Most of the mothers were committed to long-term care. 3 died within months. None ever spoke their child's real name again, because those memories didn't belong to them anymore. They called it the Ashen Room, because the walls were grey long before the fire. It wasn't part of the original orphanage design. No architectural record ever included it. No blueprints. No maintenance logs. It wasn't found until 1887, 6 months after the final child vanished, when demolition workers pried loose the rotting floorboards under the West Wing. What they uncovered was a narrow staircase leading into limestone. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because this next revelation was covered up for more than a century. And what lived in that room beneath the earth was never meant to see daylight. The Ashen Room was a chamber, 43 feet below ground, rectangular, damp, smelling of sulfur and rot. No windows, one iron door. Inside, the floor was covered in fine white dust, bone dust, later confirmed through testing. Etched into the walls were symbols no known child could have drawn. Perfect geometric runes, curved in mathematically impossible spirals, scorched into stone. One investigator remarked they resembled crop circles, only inside out. But it was what they found in the center that finally made them shut it down. 7 chairs, all child-sized, facing inward, surrounding a single wooden box. No one opened the box at first, not even the police. They brought in a theologian from Boston who fainted upon entering the room. His last words before collapsing, "They've already learned to wait." When they finally pried open the box, they didn't find toys or clothes or bones. They found teeth, baby teeth, hundreds of them, all sorted by size, polished, laid in a perfect spiral, a vortex, one analyst called it, meant to draw something in or keep something from escaping. Attached to the lid's underside was a torn piece of parchment. In charcoal, "We fed her gently. She grew cruel anyway." Now, the official report claimed this was an art installation, a deranged attempt by a former caretaker to create a grief shrine. But that same caretaker, a Miss Eliza Kerwin, disappeared 3 weeks earlier. Her last journal entry simply read, "She comes when it's quiet. She likes the cold." Here's where it gets worse. Surveillance set up in the ruins of the Ashen Room picked up audio phenomena every 19th of the month, exactly at 2:44 a.m. A voice, female, young, whispering the same phrase each time. "Turn around. You left me again." And every investigator who stayed in the orphanage overnight reported the same dream. A girl, faceless, climbing backward up the walls. The Ashen Room was resealed in 1993, but the spiral was never removed. Because when they tried, the stone burned cold, not hot, cold. And the teeth inside? They multiplied. On a silent September morning in 1886, a nurse named Lydia Bell threw herself into the icy creek behind the orphanage. Fully clothed, her apron still stained with dried milk and ink. No one saw her jump, but someone heard her scream. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of warning. When they pulled her body from the water, her arms were stiff in rigor, still pointing back toward the building. Her eyes were wide open, and carved into the skin of her palms, in letters too perfect for a blade, was a single word: choice. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because the truth behind Nurse Bell's death was buried not once but twice, and the second burial wasn't in the ground. Lydia Bell had only worked at Whispering Pines for 4 weeks. She was brought in after a previous caretaker, Miss Eloise Grantham, had suffered a psychotic break and wandered into the woods, never to be found. The official line was staff turnover. But Nurse Bell kept a diary, and that diary was found years later, hidden beneath a loose stone in the east chimney. What it contained was unforgivable. Bell had discovered a second group of children, ones not listed in the ledgers. They weren't part of the 24 officially housed. These were hidden, not in rooms, but in rolls. She wrote, "There are children I do not recall meeting, but I find their handwriting in the journals. I find their names spoken by others, yet no one sees them in the daylight." She listed names: Isabel, Jeremy, Ruth, Franklin, Mary Eyes, and the last name she wrote was the one she dared not say aloud: Clara of the Third Stair. That was the phrase Lydia Bell circled in red ink 6 times, so deeply the paper tore. Clara wasn't a child on any ledger. She wasn't in the medical files, nor in the meal logs. But her name kept appearing in the children's journals, written in shaky, terrified scrawl, always with phrases like, "Clara says don't sleep. Clara of the third stair says it's time. Clara's hungry again. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what you're about to hear was considered too disturbing for the original investigation. They burned this page of Lydia Bell's diary, but a surviving carbon copy was found hidden in the back of a theology thesis at Dartmouth. Bell had been documenting sightings of Clara. She believed Clara wasn't a child at all, but something much older, disguising itself as one. She wrote, "Clara has no shadow. Her footsteps come before she arrives. I found claw marks beneath her bed, but the mattress was never used." One passage, written 2 days before Bell's death, is now the centerpiece of ongoing private investigation. "Tonight, I watched her crawl out of the wall, not through a door, through stone. Her limbs bent wrong, like ropes soaked in milk. The other children turned to face the corner without being told. She touched Ruth's shoulder, and Ruth forgot her name." That same night, the children refused to enter the East Wing. Bell tried to move them. She recounted what one child said in a flat, hollow voice. "Clara said you were the last gift. Clara said your blood will open her mouth." Bell's final diary entry reads, "If you find this, burn the blankets. Never say her name, would, and never ever count to 3 on the staircase." And here's the part investigators could never explain. After Lydia's death, the children were lined up for roll call. 23 responded. One voice answered twice. When asked who it was, the smallest boy replied, "It's Clara. She lives in my mouth now." On the first frost of October 1886, the boy who tore out his tongue was found in the chapel, naked, trembling, his hands clenched so tightly around nothing that his knuckles had turned white. He couldn't speak, but he kept pointing to the altar, not above it, beneath it. When they removed the altar stone, a heavy slab etched with Latin scripture, they found a hollowed chamber no more than 3 feet deep. Inside were 6 rag dolls, each with human teeth sewn into their mouths. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because this hidden chamber, this altar crypt, would be the key to unlocking what the state tried to erase from the record. That Whispering Pines was not simply an orphanage. It was a ritual site. According to the documents quietly recovered by the Vermont Historical Society, this chapel had been constructed with exact geomantic precision. Not just a place of worship, a mouth aligned with lunar cycles and the buried ley lines of the forest. The dolls, investigators later discovered, weren't just tokens. Each one corresponded to a vanished child, but not the ones buried in graves. These were the ones with no death records, no obituaries, no mention of ever leaving. Gone from ledgers, vanished from memory. Their names only survived in fragments, found stitched into doll clothing or whispered by survivors in psychiatric facilities decades later. One such survivor, Judith Pelham, age 83, gave a chilling interview in 1947 from her asylum cot in upstate New York. She whispered, "I remember being 5. I remember the sin. Jing. I remember holding Clara's hand, but she was colder than the snow and her fingers bent the wrong way." When asked to describe the ritual, Judith stared at the ceiling and began humming, a melody that researchers later matched to an extinct Germanic funeral chant from the 13th century. But the most disturbing detail came next. Judith, who'd been institutionalized since 1911, had not spoken a full sentence in 30 years. But after that interview, she didn't stop talking. She screamed for 3 straight days, then clawed out her eyes, saying, "Now she can't find me." And yet, even without eyes, Judith kept repeating one phrase. "Clara's not a ghost. She's a door, and someone left her open." There's a reason the Whispering Pines Orphanage records end in December of 1886. It's not just that the building burned. It's that what happened inside that month was so unspeakable, even the survivors refused to utter a single word about it for the rest of their lives. And still, the smoke never told the full story. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because now we reach the night no one was supposed to survive. the night Clara crossed from whisper to wildfire. On December 14th, just after the sun had vanished behind the pines, a sound was reported across town, described by witnesses as 1,000 children crying into tin. It didn't come from the orphanage. It came from underneath it. According to the fire chief's private notes, never released publicly, a red mist was seen pouring from the east wing's floorboards, not smoke, mist. Heavy, sweet-smelling, and warm. Several firefighters collapsed before entering, their skin blistered without flame, and those who made it inside described rooms that shouldn't have existed, spiraling staircases, cold iron gates underground, and long halls lined with portraits of children no one recognized. One firefighter, Samuel Greaves, vanished for 11 minutes. When he emerged, he was sobbing and bleeding from the nose, clutching a broken doll. He later confessed they were certain errant orphans. They were offerings. The official report: electrical fire. But here's the part erased from the record. 3 bodies were recovered. Only one was human. The second was described as a fetal form made entirely of hair and glass. The third had no visible body at all, just a black dress, filled out as if worn, lying calmly on the stone floor. Inside its pocket was a note, scrawled in crayon, in a child's hand: "I like it better when the screaming stops." That note matched the handwriting from Lydia Bell's journal. Experts confirmed it was the same child, but that child had died in September. There is no burial record, no coffin, only a staircase leading to nowhere, now sealed under 5 tons of concrete. And above it, carved in stone before the fire reached the chapel wall: "She was never meant to be seen." The concrete slab behind the old chapel is still there. Locals walk past it every day, unaware of what sleeps beneath. But if you put your ear to the stone on a cold night, when the wind dies and the trees hold their breath, some say you can still hear her humming, and not just any tune, the same melody that Judith Pelham whispered in the asylum. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what you're about to hear was not in any newspaper nor any official archive. It came from a single reel of phonograph tape, dated January 3rd, 1887, discovered in a decaying farmhouse 20 miles from Whispering Pines. It begins with static, then the sound of firewood crackling, then a woman's voice, sharp with panic. "She's walking backwards. Don't look at her. Don't." A burst of distortion follows, shrill, mechanical, like twisted metal. Then silence. Then the hum, and behind that hum, layered in impossible harmonics, the laughter of multiple children, played in reverse. This reel was analyzed in 1979 by Dr. Irving Keel, a sound engineer at Dartmouth. He concluded that the voice was human, but the frequency modulation of the background tones had non-human rhythmic properties. His summary: if this is a child, she has more than one mouth. Now here's where it turns. That tape was found by accident, discovered in the wall of a farmhouse owned by a retired groundskeeper named Martin Holt. Holt had worked at Whispering Pines from 1883 to 1886. He vanished shortly after the orphanage burned. But inside the farmhouse, police found dozens of journals, each filled with drawings of the same child, always with black eyes, always with her hands clasped behind her back. The final journal ends with a sentence written over and over until the ink rips through the page: "Don't answer if she knocks." Martin Holt was never seen again. But in the attic, they found a small door, no handle, just a wooden cross nailed across its center. Police pried it open. The space inside was too small for a person, and yet the walls were scratched from the inside, tiny fingernails embedded in the splinters, and a final message smeared in what looked like soot: "She wants her name back." There are names you say aloud, and names you don't even think. The child from Whispering Pines. She belonged to the second kind, the kind that doesn't just haunt a building, but spreads like a mold through paper, memory, and dreams. And that's exactly what started happening to the investigators. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because the deeper they went into the orphanage's ruins, the more reality began to slip around them like wet cloth. It began with Inspector Harold Wren, a hard man, skeptic, Civil War veteran, brought in by the Vermont State Police to put an end to the fairy tales and hysteria. 2 days after visiting the site, his family reported a change in his behavior. He began whispering in his sleep, counting backward from 13 in a language no one could identify, and most disturbingly, he refused to enter his daughter's room, not because of what was inside, but because, according to his own journal, the shadow beneath her crib doesn't belong to this world. Wren's final words before being committed to a sanitarium in New York. "It wasn't arson, it was an exchange. They took the building, we got her." Meanwhile, archivist Lenora Hale, who had been hired to catalogue the Whispering Pines case materials, was found wandering the edge of Lake Champlain barefoot, clutching burnt sheets of music. She had torn out every page of her own diary, replaced them with children's drawings that matched the style of Lydia Bell and Martin Holt. Her final statement? "She's remembering faster than we are forgetting." And then came the most damning evidence of all. A fourth body, unearthed by accident during roadwork in the fall of 1903, just 30 feet from the orphanage ruins. The corpse was tiny, bones malformed, skull elongated, but the clothing, an old-fashioned child's dress, was perfectly preserved. Sewn into the hem, hidden deep in the lining, was a locket. Inside, a tiny black-and-white photograph. The face was smudged, the eyes scratched out, but beneath the photo, in faded stitching, were 4 words: "Property of Whispering Pines." This body was never officially logged. No coroner's report, no burial, because the moment it arrived at the county morgue, the building burned down. Not every fire begins with a match. Some start with memory, friction between worlds, tearing at the seams. When the morgue went up in flames on October 13th, 1903, the coroner on duty swore he heard music coming from the freezer room. A lullaby. Familiar, soft, impossible. But by the time anyone got inside, everything, records, photographs, remains, was ash. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what's left of this story isn't paper, it's in the scars of those who came too close. There was one survivor from the morgue. Fire. Deputy Francis Lowell. Young, strong, steady-minded. He pulled 3 people from the blaze before collapsing. But what he said while being treated for smoke inhalation chilled every nurse in the room. "She's not a ghost, she's a leftover." Lowell's injuries weren't just from fire. Deep claw marks ran up his arms, 5 rows each. Too small for a man, too sharp for a tool. When pressed, he refused to describe what he'd seen, but his final letter to his sister, written 3 days before his disappearance, says more than he ever said aloud. "There's no mirror in this house. I smashed them all, because she stands behind me, and I don't know whose face she's wearing." After that letter, Lowell was never seen again, not dead, not missing, gone. And it was after his vanishing that whispers about the true foundation of Whispering Pines began to surface. Records, sealed, buried, denied, surfaced in fragments. Church minutes from 1852 mentioning an underground nursery and the girl from the other place. One line, scribbled by Reverend Elijah Markham: "We built the chapel above her to hold her down, but singing cracks the stone." The implication? The orphanage wasn't built for children, it was built to feed something else, to contain it. A holy prison, hidden in plain sight, cloaked by innocence, maintained by silence, until it burned. But the fire didn't destroy it, it released it. And now, wherever a lullaby is sung at night, alone in the dark, wherever children speak to things no adult can see, people claim she appears, and all she wants is to be let in. You'd think that something so ancient, so dangerous, would have been buried and forgotten. But the real horror? It wasn't. Because starting in 1911, children across New England began humming the same tune, a tune no one taught them, a lullaby not found in any songbook, but every note identical to what was heard in Whispering Pines before the fire. The melody wasn't just in Vermont anymore. It spread. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. Because some songs don't need instruments. They use memory as a speaker and your children as the choir. A family in Maine reported their son had begun drawing a strange tree with black roots and children hanging upside down from its branches. When asked where he saw it, he answered, "I saw it in my sleep. The girl showed me. She said they live in the soil now." A schoolteacher in Albany claimed her students began speaking backwards in unison during morning prayer. The words, when played in reverse, matched the ending stanza of that same lullaby. She forgets her name each dawn, but remembers yours by dusk. And then came the incident at the Harper home for girls in Connecticut. A fire drill turned tragic. 6 children were found locked in the basement storage room. No adults had put them there. They were unharmed, but singing softly, over and over, rocking back and forth. The staff who rescued them described the sound as a lullaby sung by someone who never learned how to love. One child, age 7, named Elsie, wouldn't speak for days. When she finally did, she whispered only one thing. She's looking for her locket. Word for word, identical to what was scrawled on the walls of the Whispering Pines ruins in 1887. Researchers began to take notice, linguists, folklorists, psychologists, and the terrifying conclusion? The song wasn't a song at all. It was a key, a mnemonic device crafted in tones and rhyme, meant to unlock a specific memory or pattern in the listener, and every child who hums it becomes a carrier, a living transmitter of something older than Vermont, older than America, something that once lived in the soil beneath a chapel, until it learned how to ride the voices of the young. By 1913, the lullaby had reached Illinois, and with it, something else, a new kind of silence, the kind that fills a room right before a child says something they shouldn't know. A quiet so sharp it bleeds through wallpaper. One Chicago doctor described it like this: the room would hum before the seizures, not from electricity, from her. And when he said her, no one had to ask who. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because this story didn't stay in Vermont. It walked, crawled, hummed its way across the country, and wherever it goes, it changes how children dream. In the spring of that year, local papers ran an eerie story out of Joliet. A 10-year-old boy who carved a perfect replica of the Whispering Pines orphanage into his bedroom wall. He had never been to Vermont, never even left Illinois. When asked how he knew what it looked like, he replied, "She showed me. She said I lived there before I was born." Psychiatrists called it cryptomnesia, forgotten memory resurfacing. But what memory is that, if it predates birth? And this was no isolated incident. That same week, a girl in Decatur woke up screaming, clutching her stomach. She said there were roots growing inside her. Doctors dismissed it as night terrors, until the autopsy. She died suddenly that night without clear cause, but the medical examiner noted fibrous strands growing from the base of her spine, organic, plant-like but unidentifiable, black threads curling like tendrils, like something underground, reaching up. And then came the letters, hundreds of them, from parents across the Midwest reporting nearly identical behavior, children waking with bruises around the neck, children mumbling in their sleep, children asking to dig holes in the backyard to help her come out. Help who? We only have one recorded answer. A 6-year-old girl in Kansas wrote it in crayon on her bedroom ceiling before vanishing in the night. The girl who sings when you cry. To this day, folklorists can't explain why every child who sings that lullaby draws the same image in their notebooks, a girl with no face, holding a locket in one hand and a root in the other. She is not a ghost, she's a map, and every time a child hums that tune, she gets one step closer to being found. Again. By 1927, the FBI quietly commissioned a report titled Unexplained Behavioral Clusters Among Minors, Northeastern Region. It was never made public, but one page, just one, was leaked decades later, and on it, typed in red ink at the bottom, "Whispering Pines may not have closed, it may have migrated." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what vanished in Vermont did not stay buried. It only changed form. That year, a private investigator named Thomas Selwyn was hired by a group of New York parents. Their children had started drawing maps in chalk, all different shapes, until you layered them. Then they formed a perfect blueprint of the orphanage. Every room, every hallway, including the underground passages. Selwyn followed the clues, all the way upstate near the Hudson Valley, where he found something that would never appear in any newspaper. A house, completely sealed from the inside, no windows, only one door, covered in carved initials, children's initials, and inside, when Selwyn broke through the wall, he found 19 dolls, each one hand-stitched, each one wearing a name tag. The names matched the missing children from Whispering Pines. But these dolls weren't antiques. The fabric was new, the stitching recent, the thread still smelled of cedar and something else, something sharp, acidic, like bile or formaldehyde. Selwyn took photos, sent them to authorities. 2 days later, he was found dead in his home, throat crushed inward, no sign of forced entry, no struggle, just one item on his desk, a single strand of hair, not human, not animal, braided into a loop, tied in the shape of the Whispering Pines crest. What happened next was quietly erased. The original report disappeared from the FBI's internal archives. The house was burned to the ground during a controlled training exercise. But one item survived. A local librarian, an amateur folklorist, had borrowed one of the dolls before the fire. She kept it hidden for years, until her daughter began talking in her sleep, repeating the same sentence over and over again. She's not dead, she just found a new name. The librarian destroyed the doll in 1941, but by then, it was already too late. The whisper had become a melody, and the melody had learned to move on its own. They say music can haunt a place, but what if a melody isn't just sound, but memory, not a song you sing, but a song that sings you? On a cold November evening in 1953, a radio technician named Harold Minton picked up a strange frequency while working late at a broadcast tower in Concord, New Hampshire. It was faint at first, barely audible static, then humming. A child's voice, soft, rhythmic, and oddly melodic. He recorded it. When he played it back, he fell to the floor convulsing. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because after what happened next, no one in the Northeast would ever hear music the same way again. Minton was hospitalized for 7 days, couldn't speak, couldn't eat. When he finally recovered, the only words he said were, "She's not in the ground, she's in the airwaves now." The tape was confiscated by the FCC, officially labeled as anomalous interference. But years later, a backup copy surfaced in a university basement. A student tried to digitize it. He went missing that night. All that remained was a screenshot of the waveform. When analyzed closely, the visual frequency wasn't random. It formed a repeating symbol, the seal of the Whispering Pines Orphanage. This led Dr. Amelia Worth, a cognitive neurolinguist at MIT, to investigate deeper. She compared the melody to archival lullabies collected from 19th century orphanages. Her conclusion? This wasn't a lullaby. It was a ritual incantation, a phonetic construct designed to suppress memory, not soothe emotion. In other words, the song wasn't meant to comfort children. It was meant to make them forget. Forget the faces, forget the doors, forget the stairs beneath their beds. But the deeper Dr. Worth studied the melody, the more she began to suffer blackouts. Her own daughter reported waking up at 2:11 a.m. every night, singing in a voice that didn't sound like her. 2 weeks later, Dr. Worth abandoned her research. On the last page of her notes, written in reverse script, were 6 words. She left the building behind. So where did she go? Not into a grave, not into legend, but into something far more dangerous, a place where we carry her willingly, even lovingly, between our ears. December 17th, 1903. A local hunter named Elias Crowley wandered too far north near the forgotten trails that edge the Whispering Pines forest line. When he returned 3 days later, half-starved, frostbitten and shoeless, he was clutching a child's drawing in both hands. The image? A staircase beneath the earth, and a girl with no face standing at the bottom. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what Elias mumbled in his sleep for the next 42 hours wasn't a nightmare. It was a map. Not the kind you follow with a compass, but with your choices. He kept repeating the same phrase: 6 down, 13 forward, 4 knocks. Then listen. Local authorities chalked it up to hypothermia-induced delirium, but Reverend Matheson, one of the only men who'd ever set foot inside Whispering Pines before its closure, recognized the pattern. It was identical to the coordinates in a lost blueprint, into schematic for a sub-level of the orphanage that was never publicly acknowledged, a hidden flaw buried beneath the foundation. For years, rumors had swirled of a black stairwell sealed off in 1885. Staff who spoke of it vanished. Records were redacted, and the few children who whispered about it drew it the same way, no matter their age or ability. A winding staircase, no railings, no light, and always that girl without a face waiting below. In 1924, a team of engineers attempted an excavation during a renovation of the property. They didn't get far. 4 hours in, one of the workers began hammering the wall with his fists, screaming, "She's underneath me, inside the concrete!" He clawed at his own skin until restrained. They found scratch marks on the basement floor, on the inside of the poured foundation. The renovation was quietly cancelled. The foundation was resealed. But here's the question no one dares ask. Why build a stairwell down if it doesn't lead anywhere? And why were the orphans taught a lullaby? With exactly 6 verses, 13 words per line, and a rhythm that mimicked 4 knocks. The answer isn't architectural, it's psychological. Because the staircase wasn't meant to be climbed with feet, it was meant to be followed in the mind. A descent not into hell, but into something far colder. A place where memory unravels. And identity isn't lost. It's taken. They called her Mary Eyes in the surviving diary pages. But she had no documented birth, no photo, no assigned bed. And yet every child drew her the same way. Braided hair, blank face, standing by the cellar door, holding a silver fork in her left hand. Always the fork. Never a spoon. Never a knife. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. Because by the time you hear what Mary Eyes really was, you'll understand why Whispering Pines wasn't just shut down, it was exorcised. The first to mention her by name was Orphan Number 11, Patrick Feeney. In his mandatory composition assignment from October 2nd, 1886, he wrote, "Mary Eyes eats the noise. That's why she smiles like that. If you hear her behind the wall, you have to be quiet, or she'll eat you too." The staff thought it was a joke. Until Patrick stopped speaking altogether 2 weeks later. Not just silence. He was physically incapable of forming words. The physician wrote, "No trauma, no illness. Vocal cords appear intact. Child seems afraid of his own breath." 3 nights later, the matron on shift heard a metallic clink in the hallway, like a fork dropped on tile. When she opened the door, Patrick was gone. His shoes were left behind. The only trace? A fingerprint on the wall outside the cellar door. But here's the part no one understood at the time. It wasn't his fingerprint, it was hers. Too long, too slender, spiral patterns running the wrong way. Mary Eyes, they eventually realized, wasn't a ghost. She wasn't a girl, she wasn't even dead. She was a pattern, a system, a mirror image of attention that fed off observation. The more the children watched her, the more real she became, and she knew it. Drawings of her began appearing in rooms where no children slept, etched into the backs of mirrors, scrawled on the inside of closet doors. And then came the humming, low, tremulous, tuneless, accompanying the scrape of silver on stone. One night, a janitor opened the wrong door and found all the forks in the building, every last one, arranged in a perfect spiral across the floor. At the center was a single braid of hair, no root, no scalp, just the braid, tied with a red ribbon. And on the wall above it, scratched in childish script, "I'm still watching. October 19th, 1886. The morning shift found a fresh plate on the breakfast table, But there were no utensils, just a perfect circle of dried blood where the fork should have been. And inside that circle, a small ivory tooth, not a baby tooth, an adult molar. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what happened next was the closest the town of East Hollow ever came to open revolt. The parents, what few remained, demanded an inquiry. But the orphanage board said the children were imagining things. Mass hysteria. That's the term they used. But hysteria doesn't arrange 28 forks into an unbroken lattice and hang it from a ceiling beam without a ladder. That same day, a teacher named Miss Halbrin resigned. In her letter she wrote, "I have no memory of Tuesday. The children say I made them chant. I woke up standing in the stairwell. My shoes were on the wrong feet. My hands were covered in ash." The records show she was never seen again after that morning. But here's the part that forced the board to act. That night, Sheriff Miles, an otherwise skeptical man, was called to the property. A group of boys had broken into the west wing and dared each other to open the sealed cellar. They found it padlocked from the inside. When the sheriff forced the door open, there were no stairs, only a smooth stone shaft that descended into pure blackness. Cold air blasted from below. No wind, no machinery. Just cold. And etched into the stone wall beside the shaft, a single phrase, over and over in dozens of shaky hands. "We shouldn't have looked. See this busy bee." That was the final straw. 2 days later, on October 21st, the governor signed the emergency closure order. Whispering Pines was evacuated overnight. The children were scattered to homes across 4 counties. Some never spoke again. Others drew spirals for the rest of their lives. And the building? The building was not demolished. The cellar was filled with concrete. The land was reclaimed. But here's what they never told the public. 10 years later, in 1896, a new orphanage was built exactly 3 miles away. Within 6 months, 4 new reports emerged of a girl with braided hair, standing at the end of the hallway, holding a silver fork. No face, no voice, just watching. There's a difference between a haunting and a message. A haunting repeats. A message waits until someone is ready to hear it. Whispering Pines wasn't just haunted, it was sending warnings through time, warnings nobody wanted to understand. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because now we enter the most damning chapter of all. What was found beneath the orphanage during a failed construction project in 1907. The land had changed hands 3 times since the closure. Each time the deed came with a clause. No excavation below 6 feet. But the men hired in 1907 didn't read fine print. They were just digging a foundation for a new barn, until one of them struck something not wood, not rock, but bone. The sheriff who responded, Sheriff McAllister, was no stranger to bad scenes. But what he found that day made him quit the force forever. Beneath the orphanage grounds was an ossuary, a chamber of human remains, intentionally arranged, not buried, but displayed. Hundreds of tiny bones, organized by limb and age group, skulls polished, fingers missing, and in the center of the room, a stone lectern, flat, ceremonial, like an altar. But here's what shattered the illusion of it being some forgotten grave. Carved into the altar was a date, March 2nd, 1776, 110 years before the orphanage even existed. McAllister filed no report, but we know this because his daughter Margaret found his journal in 1942, after his death. In it, he wrote, "This land was never clean. The orphanage wasn't built on cursed ground. It was built because of it. Whispering Pines didn't fail. It fulfilled its purpose." He ends with a question no one in the family could explain. What kind of child needs that many teeth? The construction was halted. The barn was never finished. The property returned to state control, but not before one final photograph surfaced. In it, 4 men are standing at the edge of the dig site. Behind them, barely visible in the dirt, is a circle of handprints, each one missing the same finger, the index right. And just above that, scratched into the stone wall behind them, a name. Emma. No known child in the orphanage records ever bore that name. But it would appear again, 15 years later, in a place far away and far darker. She was never registered, never assigned a bed, a tutor, a meal ticket. And yet, everywhere you look in the ruins of Whispering Pines, her name bleeds through. Emma. Not written once, but carved, etched, scorched, implanted. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what I'm about to show you next isn't from some ghost story. It came from a sealed federal archive in Montpelier, obtained by a historian who didn't live long enough to publish his findings. In 1957, decades after the orphanage was abandoned and walled off, a private group, never named in state records, petitioned for a one-time access order. They brought in electrical equipment, strange generators, and a team of 7 wearing matching black coats. They didn't record their entrance, but they recorded one thing, a reel of film labeled Experiment 3, Emma Manifest. It wasn't found until 1983, when a fire damaged the Montpelier archive and unregistered footage was salvaged. The tape is degraded, but the audio is intact. You hear humming, low, almost like an engine underwater, then a child's voice, soft, hollow. Am I still good? The men don't answer. I was good when I left, but now there's something inside my thoughts. Then silence. Then a phrase repeated 15 times over 15 seconds, each repetition angrier, more fragmented, more distorted. My name is Emma. You promised I could leave. By the end, the voice sounds like it's speaking from inside metal or inside your own mouth. The reel ends with a flash of red light, then the film tears. When the state attempted to track down the team that entered that day, all records vanished. The building that housed the archive was quietly demolished, and the footage was never acknowledged publicly again. But here's the final twist. In 2022, an independent sound engineer from Burlington uploaded a filtered audio track he'd pulled from that same reel. When slowed down and reversed, the name Emma is layered under a second voice, an adult voice, male, calm, saying, "You were never a child, you were made." The Whispering Pines orphanage didn't just hide children, it manufactured identities, and one of those identities, Emma, may have never belonged to a human at all. October 2nd, 1886. The final entry in the Whispering Pines logbook is written in a shaky, nearly illegible hand. It reads only, "All accounted for, except the one we never counted." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what you're about to understand will never let you forget. Not in your sleep, not in your quiet moments, not even in your own reflection. The state sent in its last inspector 3 days before the orphanage was permanently shut down. His name was Charles Renner, a Civil War veteran with no family and no history of delusions. According to his written report, he conducted a full sweep. No children remained, no staff were left alive. The building was structurally sound, and yet he refused to return home. Renner spent the next 7 years in the Vermont State Hospital. His diagnosis: visual hallucinations, obsessional guilt, and progressive aphasia. But before his mind collapsed completely, he left behind one final testimony, a series of sketches scrawled onto the pages of a hymnal. And on the final page, 3 words. She was waiting. Emma. Mary eyes, the singularity of all the orphanage's sin. Whatever was birthed or invited into that building wasn't just a child. It was a vessel, a mirror reflecting every cruelty, silence, every system built to hide the cost of forgetting. She was a record no one wrote, a scream no one heard, a punishment that didn't wait for death. It waited for absence. In 1942, the foundations of Whispering Pines were unearthed for a brief time to clear brush. One of the workers reported finding a sealed, unburned bedroom underground, completely intact. Wallpaper still fresh, a single chair, a child-sized dress folded on the mattress, and in the wall above the bed, "Welcome home, Emma." They covered it back up by noon. But some secrets don't sleep beneath the earth. They live in the bloodlines of silence, in the places we pretend are empty, in the names we say when no one is watching. And if you ever find yourself walking too deep into the Vermont woods, if the trees start to lean and the air feels older than it should, remember this: you don't find Emma. Emma finds you. In 1886, deep in the remote forests of Vermont, a state-run orphanage called Whispering Pines was quietly shut down. Official records said neglect, but the truth was far more disturbing and deliberately buried. Over 33 haunting revelations, this video uncovers a forgotten tragedy involving missing children, secret rooms, strange symbols, and a girl named Emma who never officially existed, yet was seen by nearly every witness who lost their mind. Doctors, nurses, priests, and government agents all encountered something they could never explain, and most never spoke again. Diaries were hidden, pages torn, entire staff vanished. What was Whispering Pines really hiding? And why does the name Emma still terrify the locals who refuse to speak of the place? This is not just another ghost story. It's an expose of silence, guilt, and a horror that never died, because some children don't haunt buildings. They haunt memory itself.